Okay, we are live. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for Marcy's stream on how to build an accessible Gatsby site. This disembodied voice is Caitlin. I'm the community manager at Gatsby, and Marcy, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone, and happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'm thrilled to be here for a special live stream. Thank you, Caitlin, for the introduction. Today, we're going to talk about how to build an accessible Gatsby site. Really, a lot of these concepts could apply to any website because all websites need to be accessible for people with disabilities and everyone. So, um, as a developer advocate at Gatsby, I care a lot about making sure that the sites that we all make are doing what they can for accessibility. And for a lot of folks, you don't just start out knowing about accessibility, you have to learn about it. So if today is new for you for accessibility, welcome to the club. And it's really never too late to make a difference for accessibility on any kind of website. So today we're going to approach it as if you were trying to create a Gatsby site. What would you need to do to make it accessible? What tools, kind of what techniques, which ways of thinking do you need to apply to make an accessible Gatsby site? So we'll talk about what Gatsby gives you for free, what you need to do to test your sites. And really, it's something that is ongoing. It's not a checkbox. It's something that we have to revisit with each pull request and each deployment to make sure that we're not regressing for things that we've already fixed. And that we're continuously trying to improve because it's your job is never really done. It's similar to performance that when you make changes, you have to make sure that you're not regressing or making it worse than it was before. So a good place to start then is probably the Gatsby Docs. We have a doc on making your site accessible. It does talk a little bit about what Gatsby gives you for free. Things like our router. So Gatsby uses Reach Router. It's been a tool that we both love and have challenges with to do some client side routing on our Gatsby sites, which use React. So really, it's all about making sure that for somebody who's using a keyboard or a screen reader, that they can still navigate your Gatsby site. So accessible routing really aims to bake in good defaults. So make sure that when views are changing, for example, if I go through the Gatsby docs itself, for a sighted user who can use the mouse, they can click. And for somebody who's really relying on a keyboard, you want to make sure that your focus is in the right place. And if you're using a screen reader, that you have been informed that the page has even changed. So Gatsby's implementation does some of that for you. It can also be enhanced with some custom functionality, which we could take a look at a little bit later. I have something implemented on my personal website, marcysutton.com, so you can see how I approached it. But Gatsby should handle a lot of the defaults for you, so you don't have to really think about it, but you can always make it better. Let's put it that way. So accessible routing, a big thing that I love about Gatsby is that it builds HTML pages by default. So when you run Gatsby build on your site, it takes your components that are written in React and it outputs static HTML so that if somebody turns JavaScript off, you still have a website. You still have links that click through between pages and a site that actually works, assuming you don't have a bunch of client side only functionality. But for most content sites, you really do want your site to not rely on JavaScript for everything. So that's a good thing. Love that. Can help with progressive enhancement. Gatsby comes with the ESLint plugin JSX-A11Y. It is a plugin for linting so that when you hit save on a JSX file, and we'll take a look at what JSX is in a moment if you're not familiar, but that way, if you hit save in a template or a code file, it will alert you if you have had some common accessibility errors. So, some things like if you have links without text in them, or if you have forgotten alt text for your images, depending on how they're set up. If you use Gatsby image, you might not run into this precise error because it adds an alt attribute for you if it's empty. But linting is a really important tool to keep in your pocket to add to your arsenal of tools that you can use for accessibility testing. So Gatsby ships with it by default. I think there was even an update to Gatsby's implementation today to enable some more of the rules that are written in that library. But you don't have to set that up by yourself. If you have installed Gatsby, it will pull that in for you. So free linting for accessibility. That's exciting. And then beyond automated tooling, and we'll look at actual automated testing a little bit later using Cypress. But there are things that you really want to keep in mind for any website using your keyboard so that if someone can't use a mouse or a trackpad, that they can still reach and operate everything on the site and that they can see where they are using a visible focus indicator. You can use tools like Lighthouse or Axe or Accessibility Insights, their browser extensions. You can use those to find a lot of the low hanging fruit for accessibility. We'll be looking at Accessibility Insights a little bit later on. You want to test for adequate color contrast so that people who are low vision or who have they perceive color differently, that they can still see what's happening on the site. So I know it's tempting to put subtle color contrast on things, but it really does help your users if there is better contrast. Also helps if you're looking at a monitor in the sun, or it's just a bad projector or something like that. A lot of the things that we do for accessibility help in so many scenarios and for so many people. You also want to create inclusive and accessible forms. So anything using form inputs or selects or text areas, all of those form features, you really want to make sure they're labeled and using HTML to its fullest potential. And last Friday, actually, we had a Gatsby web creator session where we created an interactive user interface using form functionality. It's sort of pre React, pre Gatsby, but looking just at JavaScript, HTML, and CSS together to understand that foundation before moving on to React. So you could go check that stream out from last Friday. You want to make sure you're adding accessible headings, landmarks, and semantic structure. And we'll look at that in a moment. You want to include text alternatives for things like images, video, and audio. So captions, alt text for images, so that if somebody can't perceive your content, your media content, that they can still participate and understand what was in it, what was it for. A really great one that I didn't always test for, but is super important, is testing for screen magnification and zoom. So, for low vision users, to make sure that if they're zoomed in to try and look at what's happening on the screen, that your layouts aren't breaking, that you're not preventing zooming somehow. Focus management when you're jumping around the screen can impact if you're all the way zoomed in. So that's a really important one, and you can do that in your browser by just, increasing the browser size. Let's see, what else? You wanna ensure if you're using interactive menus, modals, custom widgets, if you're grabbing a component library off of the shelf, installing it from npm or Yarn or something, even if it says it's accessible too, you really wanna make sure you're actually testing it with a screen reader, with a keyboard, having, colleagues with disabilities who are paid to test, have that route happening, because a lot of times I think the temptation is to create custom things because, say, you can't style a select the way you want or a radio button or something, and you're trying to do your job as a developer when you've been handed a very custom design. Accessibility can't just be thrown out for design's sake. And so we want to make sure we test that kind of thing. Let's see, creating safe animations in motion. So no autoplay if you can avoid it. Using prefers reduce motion, which is a really great CSS media query. You can actually turn animations off if a user has requested it. And really, the goal here is to not give someone a seizure or make them motion sick. It is a safety issue, so we want to make sure we're using animation and motion with thought and carefully. And then lastly on this list, we have writing Cypress accessibility tests for your site or application, which we're going to do today after we get a project set up. And also on this doc, there's some great resources for you to learn more. And hopefully, this is a good introduction for how to create an accessible Gatsby site. And now we're going to go do it. So, If anyone has questions, by the way, feel free to ask them in the chat, and Caitlin will relay them to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions along the way. And really, we're just opening the door to accessibility. It's an ongoing learning thing. I'm learning about accessibility all the time, and I want to encourage you to go on that journey to make your sites more accessible, because it really does make the world a better place, and it's worth it. So, on this Global Accessibility Awareness Day, let's make an accessible Gatsby site, shall we? So, if you were going to create a Gatsby site, you may or may not have a design. A lot of people go and look for a starter, which is a project that has Gatsby code in it already that you can install or clone, and then you can get a site going with some customizations like changing your site title. And however that starter is configured, you can make your changes whether or not you decide to change the design. A lot of people go that route because there's so many starters. For V2, the starter library was showing me there's 392 of them, and I can filter them further. Like if I wanted to think about what kind of content I was going to pull into my Gatsby site. So Gatsby has what's called the content mesh, which means we can pull in a bunch of different content sources. We can use the best in breed APIs for things like authentication or sending newsletters or whatever those features are that your site needs. You might use a CMS, for example. So there's starters that have these combinations for you that you can get up and running quickly. For example, if I were going to build a site with Gatsby and headless WordPress, I might go and look at a starter. There's one on the first page for Gatsby Starter WordPress 2020, which is a port of, I'm guessing, WordPress's 2020 theme over to a Gatsby version. So this means you would be able to put your content in WordPress. Gatsby pulls it down. It builds a static site. WordPress could be on your machine locally. It could be you could be going out and hitting it on a server somewhere, but Gatsby will go and grab the content, build a static site, and then your live Gatsby site is not dependent on WordPress. So I've actually done that before. So I want to go look at this demo. And this is what I would do if I were evaluating a starter. I'd open the demo. I mean, the first thing I would do is use my tab key. So I've got a visible focus indicator on these links in the header. That's a great start. I have a little menu button here, and I found my first issue in that I'm hitting the tab key, but I don't see where I am. And so what this tells me is that this menu isn't actually hiding. And so this is a bit of an error in the starter, that it's got this little menu thing here. And sure enough, if I tab with it open, that's where my focus was going. It's really close to being right. It might just be a bug with the starter. So that would be a great thing to open in a GitHub issue against the starter itself. And hopefully that's an outcome. Like if there's one thing that you could take away from the stream, it would be to have your accessibility thinking cap on. And if you find bugs, go report them and try to make the ecosystem better, because that's how we're really going to move the needle, is by all doing our part, testing, seeing how things go, reporting issues, and that is really effective over time. So I could go report a bug for this. To debug it, if I open it up in the developer tools, I did a control click and then inspect from this context menu on my Mac. So this code, I can watch it. When I interact with this menu, I can look at how the DOM here in the element inspector, how it reacts or how it changes. So when I open it, it adds some CSS classes. When I close it, I can see this. There's a CSS class here that says show modal, even when it's not open. And I believe that is what is causing the issue. So there is a menu modal, show modal CSS class here that has a display of flex. Somehow that class is being added even when this modal isn't showing, because it really should be this display none. And display none in CSS will hide the contents from everyone, which in this case is what we want. We want to hide it from keyboard users and screen reader users. So if I close this modal and I just go in here to test it quick and dirty like, and I remove this show modal class, now if I tab through here, I skip on by. So I could verify when I go to report my bug on GitHub, that removing that show modal class will fix this issue. So that's pretty awesome. And that seems fixable. Like I could go and fix that. It wouldn't prevent me from using the starter. That's one issue that I found. So if I kept tabbing, check multiple pages, that's a good thing to look at. So keyboard tabbing is usually my first bet because you can find issues pretty quickly like that. Another thing that I would do is use a browser extension. So I'll show you because I already have it installed. Accessibility Insights from Microsoft is one of my favorite extensions. You can get a web browser extension for Chrome, and there's a Windows version for desktop stuff and an Android version. And when you have this installed, it gives you this little toolbar. I love this icon because I love hearts. And so it's got a little heart with a looking glass on it. And when you have this installed, you click it and it gives you this little overlay with some options. So I can run a fast pass to detect if there's any automated issues, which there aren't. Awesome. I can close that if I want. I could go to, there's a more guided assessment if I were doing, this is an initial check for this, but when I had my final site all done, or maybe not final, somewhere in the development process, if I wanted to go and do a more full guided process for assessing accessibility, I could use the assessment. But there's also these ad hoc tools, which I love. There's things like headings. So if I turn this on and kind of click out of the little window to hide it, I can see that there is an H1 for the site title. The page title says Hello Gatsby and WordPress World, and that's an H2. So there's H2s here. And you really want the H1 per page that's rendered. There's been a little debate over H1s recently.
Hey, Marcy, it looks like we lost your audio. Um, hey, Marcy. It sounds like we've lost your audio. Marcy. Oh no. Sorry, folks, for the issue. Gonna try to see what we can do to figure this out. Starting to hear it. You're quiet, but
Gosh darn it. How about now?
Now I can hear you.
I'm glad I checked. So thanks, Zoom. It popped up that little like Zoom needs to restart
Oh
thing,
no.
like after I was going through there. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for the alert. I was just yakking there for a while, wasn't I?
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I'm not sure how far to backtrack. I feel like we're a few minutes past you showing us accessibility insights, but
Yeah. So I think I know about when that message came in. I was talking about landmarks and just going on and on and on without my audio.
you're in the zone.
Yeah, it was totally. I was like, I'll deal with it after I'm done with this thought. That was not the right call. Well, anyways, I was talking about landmarks and how awesome this starter is. It had that one bug with the menu, but there's so many landmarks in here. And I was talking to myself apparently about how this nav element here it's a nav element, first of all. So it gives us, if I go to the accessibility tab in Chrome, I can go and look at some ARIA attributes, including how it has a role of navigation. I mean, it has it bolted on here with ARIA as well, and that is for Internet Explorer. So if your analytics have any users using any version of Internet Explorer, you will want to bolt on these roles extra, which there's been a bit of a debate over that. But it can mean that for a user with a disability who is using Internet Explorer, that pages would have more semantic meaning. So makes sense to me. And I love that they have added an ARIA label of posts here. So this will differentiate multiple nav elements, which there are multiple here. There's the one at the top. And if I inspect that one, we can go and look at what's on that one. That is an insights landmark. Not so the browser extension injects its own markup. Here is the primary menu wrapper class is on a nav element, and this one has an ARIA label of horizontal. And the labels are arbitrary. You can put whatever you want, but when you have multiple elements, landmark elements like this, and they're pulled up in a list, say in NVDA screen reader or in JAWS, which is another Windows screen reader, when you have all these landmarks listed, giving them unique labels helps them to be identified. So super cool. So that's landmarks. I assume my audio is still working. So let's see. Color. The color. You can. So this took out any reds and made it more grayscale for somebody who can't see color. That makes sure that, say, these links that are in kind of a light red, that you can still see them. If somebody can't perceive reds or greens or different color, different ways of processing color with your mind, that you want to make sure people can still see it. So that's what this little color thing is. So let's go look at another starter because I don't know that I really want to use WordPress at the moment. Maybe I wanted to put my content in Markdown. I could filter these starters by that. Here's one for this Skylight using Material UI and MDX Markdown support. So let's go look at that one. So this one has pretty good contrast. I could do my keyboard test again. Oh, and the first thing I see is that there is no visible focus indicator on these items in the header. And so if I go inspect those, this is interesting. So there is a header, this is a banner header. It doesn't have the role bolted on, but implicitly, if I go and look over here in the accessibility inspector, it will say banner because it is a global header. It's not nested or part of an article or a section or something. But this item over here is an anchor with no href attribute. So that's what links are meant to navigate. And they have an href. Oh, I guess there is one here. It points to the homepage. I almost missed it. But it also has a roll of button and a tab index of 0 bolted onto it. It has an aria disabled to false, which I don't really know why. I guess trying to make this into a button, potentially because of the way it looks. So that seems problematic to me. Like it doesn't need this tab index at all because it has an href. Aria current is great for links, so you can say this is the page we're on. You can mark it programmatically with Aria current. But this button functionality, I don't think they needed really. And to figure out why the focus isn't showing up, here it is, outline 0. So this needs to go away. And if you have outline 0, you need a really good reason and a replacement for it. Something so that if a user can actually see where they are on the screen. So if I turn that off, I get the default blue outline in Chrome, which is not super visible on the purple background, but it's better than nothing. And potentially making a custom one for your header would make more sense. Anything other than outline 0 would be nice. These other two over here, looks like that same CSS class applies to these as well. So if I tab through here now, I can actually see where I am. And if I were going to run some automated checks, I could go, maybe I'll go look at the list view. So there's some issues here with document title. So this demo site actually does not have a title on it. And if I go back over here, if I hover over this tab, yeah, sure enough, it's just the site URL, which is what the browser falls back to if there is no title. So that's an issue that I would want to fix on my site, but also the starter, that would be a good bug to file, is that there's no title. Gatsby sites usually use the React Helmet library, and that will give you a good hook to add code that should go in the metadata part of your HTML documents. So stuff that goes in the head, like the title, social sharing metadata, that kind of stuff. You use React Helmet for that. So that's what the starter needs looks like. So it's missing a title. It's also missing the lang attribute. So on the HTML element, you put lang equals and then whatever language, which will depend on what language your content is currently written in. But it should have some kind of a default. For me, my sites would be in English, so I would put them in English. So I don't know about this starter. I'm thinking I'm gonna not move forward with this one. And that's okay. And maybe there's some bugs to file. Maybe it works for other folks with some fixes added. But I think I'm not going to go to that one. And there's one that I've seen that actually I'll show you how I found it. If I type accessibility into the Gatsby starter library, there's a few in here that claim that they have some accessibility stuff built in. And like I said earlier, you always want to check, like just verify, because things can break unintentionally. It's something that we want to keep up on, similar to web performance and security. But this novella theme is pretty fancy. I mean, if I don't really want to come up with a design, this one looks pretty solid. And I could go and do a similar test of this and go and check. So the first thing I notice is that they have custom focus styles, which are pretty. I like them. It has this dark mode, which has a little animated SVG icon that flips back and forth. The contrast looks a little low in dark mode, so maybe that could be bumped up. I have sort of learned to train my eyes to look for faint contrast. It's a skill that I appreciate having, but it's a bit of a curse at the same time because I can't just look at a site and not be thinking about what the contrast is like. So this has some cool features in it that I think could work really well. If I want to run accessibility insights on it, I can go run some checks. We can go look at the list view. Looks like there's some contrast issues on some of the bio text. And this is interesting. So it says element has insufficient color contrast of 4.49 to 1. It needs to be 4.5 to 1, which is so close. I mean, that I've seen in automated tooling could be the difference between the automated tool rounding down versus rounding up. When it really, the tool needs to be rounding down because the requirement is that the contrast is actually 4.5 to 1, not close. Um, Even though our eyes might not be able to tell the difference really. But the good news is that if it's that close, changing the color value should be really like you should barely even be able to tell to get it to be 4.5 to 1. So, what I'm going to do to play with that, I'm going to take this demo example and I'll pull this down locally too. But if I go look at it in Firefox, which is another great browser to have in your tool set, I can go and turn on the accessibility features in the developer tools, and I can go look at this specific item. And when I open this, it's so cool that they have added this in Firefox. It gives me the same report. So 4.49, I have now verified with two different tools that the contrast ratio is not meeting requirements of 4.5 to 1. And to back up a little bit, ratios are the difference in color range of the values from the foreground to the background. So this gray color on a white background needs to be bumped up a little bit. And if I were going to debug this, trying to fix it, I'd go look at the element, find the color, and maybe I'd drag it down a little bit. This is a little small in the Firefox inspector. So maybe let me see if I can zoom my browser. No, it sure doesn't want
Hey,
to let me.
Marcy, we did get a question a couple minutes ago.
Sure.
So Todd Libby asks, does it depend on the theme you're using in order to add the lang attribute in Gatsby? They were having errors thrown at them in the starter theme yesterday when they were messing around with it.
Oh, good question. I mean, the starter should do it for you if possible. Like if every individual site was having to fix it, I mean, it would be ideal if the starter kind of handled it for you and then maybe you could override. I would guess, yeah, I'm not really sure because React Helmet is giving you the stuff that kind of goes in the interior of the head, not necessarily the HTML element itself. In Gatsby, there is an API to wrap root elements. And let's see, what is that other API? There's an HTML.js file that you can optionally like add to get a little more control over the entire HTML scaffold. So I could look at it a little bit later, but off the top of my head, it should be something that is handled for you, like at the starter level, or yeah, really any time you're trying to manipulate the HTML element directly in Gatsby, you're going to be doing some custom stuff. So that's why having it be part of a starter or something that you just copy and you don't have to worry about. So I'll have to follow up on that one. But good question. And if anyone has the answer off the top of their head, feel free to add it. But I've got a color here that works a little better. It's saying so I can drag this around in the Firefox color picker and see when it meets or doesn't meet these ratios. And making it visible when I do that in the browser, I can drag this around and see what does the text color look like. And so some sort of a gray here would be nice, and I'll want to go in and make that change. Probably I could open a bug like in the starter or the theme itself, so that then every person who uses this can benefit from that change in color, and then they're not all having to go and fix this. So a great activity to do for on days like this is to go and test things out and go file some bugs, and then every person who uses that same project can benefit from the reporting that you've added for the good of the community. All right, so I've got this project sort of like jump forward a little bit. I pulled down that novella starter And I've got a project on GitHub called the Gatsby Accessibility Starter. And this is a sandbox for us to play around with this novella theme. I have gone in this final example that you can pull down from GitHub, which I'm going to be showing you how I created it here in a moment. But the final example on GitHub has Cypress and Cypress Axe installed, so you can do some automated testing. And I've pulled in a Reach UI component. So if you were, going to choose a component and you wanted to put it in your project, Reach UI is pretty accessible. There's another project called Chakra UI that I considered using. It was a little bit complicated. The docs were a little bit outdated. And so I decided to keep it simple and used Reach UI here. But any component library that works, you want to make sure you're testing it and filing bugs and not just assuming that everything's fine, because it's out there and I used it. It's like, well, users don't really care about that part. They just want to use the site. And if they can't, because we didn't test it, well, that's something we need to address. So to pull down this project, you can do Gatsby new novella site. I need to update this README because it should say Marcy Sutton Gatsby Accessibility Starter. Free PR idea. If somebody wants to update my README, I will do it after this. Anyway, but so I've got this project already pulled down and I'm going to open it up in VS Code. So I'm using VS Code as my text editor. And the first things I modified in here were in the Gatsby config. So I changed the site name, the site URL. I could go and add a description if I wanted, and all these various things. My social links, they're still pointing to the narrative company who made this starter, but I could go and update these to all of mine. This starter also uses a Gatsby theme called Gatsby Theme Novella from Narrative. It's a really robust theme. It's written in TypeScript. It uses emotion for styling. It has an optional plugin Netlify CMS integration. That's pretty cool. So once I've pulled down this code, I need to open a terminal. And I will clear out what I had in here before. Sometimes I have dueling tabs. Like I will have one terminal, for doing Git, so I can commit my changes and things. And then maybe I have another terminal tab or the built-in terminal in VS Code to go and run my Gatsby Develop commands. So in this project, Gatsby Accessibility Starter, I could run Gatsby Develop, and that will run the development process on my Gatsby site. And it will, if I say I used that WordPress integration, it would go and scrape WordPress for me and pull all that content in. In this case, it's using both Markdown and this optional Netlify CMS, which is pretty cool. So it does say Netlify CMS is running. You can get to it at this localhost port 6574. It's also localhost 8000/admin. It's both of these URLs. I did find that you have to run a second process to get the Netlify thing to work. You have to, I think I have it running, which is why this worked. In another tab, you run yarn proxy for this particular starter. I'm not really using the Netlify CMS part, but that's how you get that to work in case you run into it. So now I've got localhost port 8000 open, and voila, I have this site that I can work on locally. So I could go and do my testing, make some changes, add my own content. I could get up and running pretty quickly with this. So if I'm adding my content, it's really helpful to test for accessibility along the way. So I guess the first thing that I could do, more accessibility browser extension testing. So we really only had the one issue on accessibility insights automated checks, which was the color issue. And I think that one could be solved at the starter level. But that means that we're set up pretty nicely for, at the individual developer level. Like I can go make one recommendation upstream to try and fix this. And then the next time I pull down their theme, it should update as long as they've fixed it. But I want to check things like, oh, it looks like there's one more down here in the footer, and it's probably the same color. So I want to make sure that my content is actually going to be understandable, and all of that good stuff for accessibility in general. So I can actually see it looks like maybe there's one color contrast issue here that didn't get caught. This April 30th text, April 30th, 2019, 2-minute read, that's way more faint than this other text. So this is where that sort of training your eye to look for low contrast really helps, because sometimes the automated tools don't catch it all. And automated tooling, depending on the rule set, the tool might only catch between 30 to 50% of accessibility issues by volume. And that's not very much. There's a lot of other accessibility issues that we have to look at manually. And I can tell right here. Here's one. So this color, if I go inspect it, I'm going to go look at what kind of an element is it. Is it made with a gradient or something? Because gradients are a known kind of like loophole with color contrast that they're really difficult to test for. Um, test for automatically, I should say. So this is a div, and it's using a color variable in CSS, and I honestly have no idea why this didn't show up. It has a low opacity, so if I turn that off, that's probably better. I could go test it in Firefox. So this is where having multiple tools is really useful. This text right here didn't pop up in Accessibility Insights, but maybe it will. I'll go back over here to the Accessibility Inspector in Firefox. Here, this one shows it 1.51 to 1. And that's pretty low. It should be 4.5 to 1 for small non-bold text. So that's really could be better. And similar to our other color, I can go in here with the color picker, and that is the other color that we had. So same workflow as before, but those are kind of upstream changes that we should add. So let's add a custom component. I've got some code installed already from Reach UI, the Reach menu button, and I can show this to you on the Reach site. Reach from Ryan Florence and his team has created some I don't know if you can hear the dog. um, Reach UI has really minimal styling and accessible defaults, which is fantastic because that makes it a lot easier to restyle things. You're not battling a bunch of CSS all the time. So I've got this installed. I am going to go over to my code, and I have jump started this project a little bit in that because doing a little bit of a tour of this project, it's pretty light on files. Like because it uses this Gatsby theme novella from Narrative, there's no templates in here. There's like a lot of the code that, if you hand coded everything in your Gatsby site, some of the functionality that's making this site possible is tucked away. And I can show you where. And in node modules, under narrative, it's at narrative, Gatsby theme novella. This is where the code lives that's making this site happen. So, like the template for articles, the author pages. This is the stuff I mentioned that's written in TypeScript. I don't really need to write my versions in TypeScript, but if I want to make any changes to this, I have to do what's called theme shadowing. And so I want to add something to the navigation header component, which is the stuff that in my example, it's where this little copy icon and this little dark mode switching button thing, this all lives in this navigation header component. So I'm shadowing that one by copying the same folder structure. So within source, I created a folder called @narrative. And then inside of that, there is a folder called Gatsby Theme Novella. And then you sort of mimic the same folder structure and create a file with the same name. And so now I have this navigation header And if I left it empty or blank, really minimal, it would replace what was in that theme before. At least that's how I understand it. But I want to take what was there and add. So I've left most of the code in there, but I'm going to go and add some stuff. So to do that, make sure I'm in the right place. I want to add some stuff from Reach. So I need to import it first. So I need a few different objects from the Reach library, which I have installed. I need menu, menu list, menu button, menu item. And I think that might be it. Menu items. And I can see if that's all I need or if I need more. And I'm going to say import it from @reach menu button. And that will import, really pluck off the things that I want from that Reach menu button, which another piece to this that I should show you quickly is in my package.json file where I have installed @reach menu button. And so I installed that with Yarn. If you are using npm, you can install it from there. And the Reach UI docs have a lot of tips on what exactly you need to install. But I've got that in here. So now I can import it. And once I've imported it, I can refer to it in my code. So I'm going to go down. I think I'm going to put the menu button right next to the dark mode toggle. So I know I need some of the code from Reach. So I'm going to go over to their docs. Really the basic example, this one has quite a few items. If I look at under the installation, this is where you see these imports. I'm going to take this basic example of the menu structure, and I will go back to VS Code, and I could start off by putting it next to the dark mode toggle, drop it down to the next line, and paste this in here. So that should be enough to render something. I'm going to hit save, go over to my browser, and it wants menu link. I am using menu link, but I didn't import it. Menu link, and I don't think I'm using menu items. So it really wants you to only pull in what you actually need. So you're not importing code that isn't being used. Aha! Look at that. So I copied in this example from Reach, and I have this little actions thing. It didn't include any styling at all. So just the component. So if I want to pull in Reach's default styling, there is a CSS file that I need to import on another line. I will say import quote @reach menu-button /styles.css. And I hit save. And Gatsby is hot reloading in the background. So it went and refreshed this page for me. And now if I interact with this page, I'm going to refresh it just in case. There's no focus style in this now. So I have created a problem for myself that I'm going to have to go and fix. This does work from a mouse. And so this is a bit of this is a good thing for you to see me experience. So this narrative theme and starter, it created this fancy focus style, but it disabled the default one. So I have to go put it back now. And I could see, if you weren't testing with the keyboard and you only checked this with the mouse, you might never know. And that's how a lot of this happens. So I need to go and do a similar treatment to what Narrative did. So let's go see what they are doing for focus styles. So if I just search in this file for the word focus, I can go and look at the logo link. They are using Emotion Styled Library to go and do some pretty crafty focus. And yeah, there's a lot of code here dealing with focus. So I guess, I made this choice. I'm going to go through with it. We're going to make this focusable and visible. So I need to do something really similar. So what I'm going to do is wrap the Reach component in my own component, and then I can apply some styling to it. So I'm actually going to abstract this. I'm going to cut. So I have that code in my clipboard. I'm going to make a custom Reach menu. And then above this navigation header component, I will go and make a const was custom reach menu. And in this arrow function, I'm going to look at some other examples. So, like the share page button version, they have some code in here to go and check dark mode, which is important because we want our menu text to like change gracefully as well. So I know I need some of this code, and I'm going to return. I could start there. Return. And actually, I need parentheses, and I will paste my reach code so that I can get it out of my clipboard. I've got it returning the code that I wanted. I can wrap it in a moment. I am going to copy a little bit of code from this other function, and maybe this could be cleaned up a little bit to make it so I'm not repeating myself. But I'm going to get this working first of all. So I've got the color mode, this variable here, getting it from the use color mode. It's probably a hook in here somewhere. The next line sets another variable for is dark, and it checks whether color mode equals the string dark. And the other examples were using SVG. So they were setting the fill CSS property for that SVG depending on what it was. So I'm going to change this to color maybe, and I could wrap this. I'm going to apply that color instead of a SVG fill. I will apply a color to this somehow. So I'm going to add a custom element here. So reach wrapper. This is sort of getting it into the style that the rest of this navigation component was expecting. Make it all work together. So I'm going to add this data-a11y. I don't really know why they added this, but it's how this works. So I'm just going to make it work. I'm also going to add a data test ID in case we actually have time to do some automated testing. An hour goes by really fast. So I've got this wrapped in a reach wrapper. And in the menu button, if I wanted to apply that style, just get it working quick and dirty, I could say color equals color. And reach wrapper, I need to define. So I'm going to go down here by the styles. Maybe I'll copy one like I'll start with this icon wrapper because I know that one's pretty similar. It creates a button. I'm going to drop this down to another line. And I've got this is reach wrapper. I'm going to make it a div, not a button. The one thing I know I need to change is that the focus, I'm like this isn't outputting a button. This is a div that's wrapping my interactive functionality. So inside of this data A11Y true, this data attribute, that's a parent of what will be this interactive button element. And when I focus on a button inside of there, that's when I want this focus style to show up. So let's save that, see if it worked. Didn't like my color mode. Oh, because I already declared it. I copied it from somewhere. I'm surprised it didn't fail on that other instance that did the same thing. Oh, because it auto-completed the word color mode when I wanted the word color. That was my own error. All right, so I hit refresh now. This menu text is a little bit faint because it has some opacity I might remove. And maybe I need to play with this a little bit. It is cutting off the text, but it's focused and it's showing something. So I'm going to call that part good for now because I really want to show you how to write an automated test for this in our last few minutes. So I've added this functionality. It works sort of. It's getting there. But what I really want to do is bake it in with an automated test using Cypress. So Cypress is an automated end-to-end testing framework. I'm going to scroll up here in my project. Once you have it installed and you run it the first time, it will automatically create some of these folders for you for fixtures, plugins, and support. And then in the integration directory is where I have some files for writing automated tests. And I can show you something else is that in my package.json file, there's a section called scripts. And under scripts, I have some items for test:(E to E for end to end. And then there's a test:(E to E CI. So these two test commands, they will call Cypress to either open it with its graphical user interface or to run it. Say if it's running it on GitHub or Circle CI or something where you just want it to run and close down and be done and, report if it passed or failed. I'm going to write a test in here for our little menu thing. So I think that's about what we have time for. And there is one item that there's a tool for Cypress I could run called Cypress Acts that will run some automated tooling. I have an example of that. I could probably undo my deleting of changes. In the homepage JS test, you can see an example of how Cypress Acts works. And that is enabled in the support index file for Cypress is where I import Cypress Acts. But I am going to write a custom test for the navigation. So I'm going to say in Cypress terminology, before each test, say I had a bunch in this file, I could say sci.visit, and I'm going to tell it to go to localhost port 8000 because that is what is being opened with my project, my Gatsby project. And I'm going to write my first test that says it has a focusable menu. I was going to call it an accessible menu, but we haven't done much screen reader testing yet today. So I'm going to start there. You can only do so much in an hour, So it has a focusable menu. I'm going to say const menu button, and I will say sci.get. And this is where I'm going to use that data test ID. And I got to make sure that I know how I wrote it. It was data-test-ID. So let's make sure that's written right. Data-test-ID. This is attribute selector syntax. So I can put equals quotes, and menu button is this specific item. And that was on a wrapper. So it was menu. So menu. And I can use CSS here. So if I want to target the button inside of that wrapper, that's pretty good. It'll keep a Reach UI happy because that gets swapped out for, Reach goes and does its thing. So this is where my wrapper element gives me a little extra handles. So I could say menu button.focus. I'm mimicking a keyboard user to say if they've focused on this. I could go and do some assertions for my focus style if I wanted. But I'm going to say menu button.type. I'll pass a string with this curly brace for enter. And so this is really similar to saying menu button.click, but I'm specifically using keyboard commands to do it. So I'm going to say menu button.should have.adder, aria-expanded. And I expect that once I've activated this menu, that should say true, because that's what Reach goes and adds to it. And then one more thing I could say, so when that menu opens, it sends focus to the first item in there. So I'm going to say sci.focused. It's a really great API from Cypress. And I could say sci.focus. So whatever Cypress is focused on at that point, it should have an attribute with a role of menus, because it sends focus to the menu itself and then uses JavaScript and an active descendant. So I've got this test written. We're just about out of time, but I could run these down here by saying yarn run test : E to E, which is what we had in our package JSON file. So it's complaining at me that I already have it running in another tab, but it opens it anyway. Thanks, Cypress. So I have my two tests here. I could go and run my navigation one. This is the graphical user interface from Cypress that I mentioned. The CI version of the script will skip this part and just run the tests in the background. So Cypress will load up your site. and do what you told it to do. And in this case, it opened the menu. I can actually see that it's open over here. And I can step through each of these parts of the test to see what was it doing. Did it focus on the right thing? And data test IDs are great for that. So your tests are a little less brittle with, depending on CSS and things. I guess one last thing that we could do before we wrap up would be to go back to this other test and see how the Cypress Axe ran on here to give you a bit of a tip there. So I ran this on the home page. It found some issues that actually didn't even come up with Accessibility Insights, which is interesting because Accessibility Insights uses Axe Core, but they might be different versions. Who knows? But if I open this up and it has violations, so the trick here that I'll show you quickly is that in Cypress, you want to open the developer tools for the rendered browser and go to the console. There is an error with my code, but that isn't really related. If I click on this assertion over here that failed, the details end up over here in the console. And so it can be really valuable to go and look at the console to make sure what was broken. So, like, which element, which tags did that rule have? How does it apply to the web content accessibility guidelines? That's where a lot of these tags. So, this is a best practice rule, it's not actually a violation. We didn't really talk about the web content accessibility guidelines, but they are a really great guide for you to figure out how do I make an accessible site. So this is really just the beginning, and I hope that I've piqued your interest and your excitement about accessibility testing, and really just inspiring you to get started. Because today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I'm so glad that you joined me, but really every day should be Accessibility Awareness Day. So if you've got questions, you can hit us up on Twitter. We have another live stream tomorrow for Gatsby web creators when we will be playing with Node.js. And so, yeah, stay tuned for more live streams, and happy testing.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcy. Thank you, Jane, for captioning. And thank you all for joining us today. Again, let us know if you have any questions. And if you don't follow us already, now is a great time to do that. And we'll see you around. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.